If you come here to Ukraine, the automatic perceived value that you will get from just being from Western Europe or North America is probably, let's say in Odessa or even in Kiev a lot, it's probably even a negative.
SAR Experience.
Привет is Kievia. Greetings from Kiev in Ukraine, and welcome back to another episode of the Vodka Vodcast with me, Connor Klein. And in today's episode, we are going to go into the third part in a three-part video series on the Vodcast, outlining the 5 biggest mistakes made here dating in Eastern Europe, divided by age group. So, the first video we had the boomers, the second one was Gen Xers, and in this one it is going to be the millennials. So if you missed the first two, I'll link them up in the card down below in the description. And I did change the definition a little bit, the age definition of those three categories ever so slightly, just to make them fit in a bit more what I see here amongst my clients, my friends, just guys I meet here in Eastern Europe from the West. I changed those age categories. So for this one, millennials are going to be 20 to 35. I know they're a little bit older if you take the actual definition look, but anyway, it's a bit of a gray area about exactly when all these age groups start. But from my experience, from my viewpoint here in Eastern Europe, having coached guys and seen just so many, especially younger guys, in the last few years coming to Ukraine, I think 20 to 35 is a good way to define it, because it changes a little bit when you go above that and you become what I defined as a Gen Xer last time. Now, I'm not saying that these 5 mistakes only affect millennials. Of course, they also affect the other age groups, but less. I think these are the ones that affect millennials the most. And in the other videos about the boomers and about the Gen Xers, there were also points that if you are a millennial, you should also see, because you don't want to make those mistakes anyways. They just happen to afflict those age groups a little bit more. So now that out of the way, millennials, 5 biggest mistakes that you make when you come here to date beautiful Slavic women in Ukraine, Belarus, or in Russia. Let's dive into the first big mistake, which is you don't have the cojones to go and approach women. Basically, you haven't developed enough what's known, I guess, colloquially as game, right? This is the biggest thing, mistake I see, the biggest downside to being a millennial here in general, is that you just haven't had enough time to work on essentially your confidence levels and learned how to approach women, or even if you get them on the dating app, which is what millennials tend to over rely on compared to the other age groups, actually just the dating apps like Tinder, for example, or Instagram. They're not able to go over and approach, and then even when they get the girl on the date, they have no idea what to do. They don't have the presence. Now that is even more important here in Eastern Europe, because, and I'm going to go into this, I've been promising for a while, a primer on Real Man. We'll have it here in the podcast pretty soon, may even shoot that tomorrow. And basically, you need to be really assertive and to lead here a lot more than in the West, where it happens to be Western Europe, or in North America in particular. So you need to learn game, basically to learn to be a real man and actually go over and be able to approach first of all. And even if you're not, you are over relying on the dating apps, which a lot of millennials do, you need to be able to leave and be assertive. And that is the thing that I see millennials in particular lacking the most, probably because they don't have as much practice, not just because they're younger, but also because you're like, I guess you grew up with apps. It's more normal for you to be using these dating apps, not even a dating website like it would have been before. A lot of boomers tend to use the dating website where they're sitting on a laptop more, but actually using those swipe left, swipe right kind of apps, it is something that millennials have grown more accustomed to, and I know the generation afterwards even more so. So you don't need it as much maybe to go over and make those initial contacts and introduce yourself. But doing that, it will be a great investment of your time as a millennial, because that's the thing that I see lacking the most, and that will help with that immensely in terms of becoming a real man, as the Russians speakers like to say, whether it's here in Ukraine or in Russia itself. So that's the first big mistake. Second biggest mistake made by millennials when they come here is they don't understand that they don't have a lot of status here. because they haven't hit their prime. Now, I talked about this actually in the last video about Gen Xers not realizing that they have hit their prime. Millennials don't seem to understand that they still have that in front of them a lot, right? So they think that they come here, and Gen Xers, as we said, are for this video, are going to be 20 to 35 years of age. So maybe you're in your early 20s, you're a millennial, you have so much time in front of you before you hit your peak, because men in general, we tend to peak, and it's not the same for everybody, but we tend to peak between the ages of 35 and 45. Now, some guys become a wreck by the time 35 and their peak was before, but if they've taken care of themselves, they would have hit their peak around 35. I can say that in my experience, that was it. So if you're a millennial and you're a little bit frustrated, listen, it will get better if you work on yourself, because you're going to hit your peak later on. And looks matter a lot less here than they do in the West, and your status and your presence, as I said with the real man first point, matters a lot more than in the West. So basically, you have to realize that you're going to hit your peak later. You don't have a lot of status necessarily for girls here. They do like a guy in general who's got more of that presence, who's got more status, a lot more confident, and in general they tend to be a bit older. So a guy closer to the peak definitely does better here than necessarily in the West, where looks, from what I can see in my experience when I go back to the West, play a greater role. I wouldn't say they're the main thing, but they play a greater role in the West than they do here. So just be aware of that when you come, that thinking like the pretty boys always complain when they come here to Ukraine, no matter what their age, but they tend to be rely that more when they're younger, and they leave very disappointed. So definitely you have to realize that you're going to have to work on the real man mindset and project that you are maybe a bit more mature and have a little more presence than you do actually in fact have, and don't rely on your looks as much. And it's all ahead of you, because you're going to hit your peak when you're 35. So just be aware of that. That's the second biggest mistake I see millennials doing here. Now, the third biggest mistake I see by millennials is they rely too much on being from the West. Now, a lot of foreigners do this, no matter what their age, but in particular millennials, because they maybe just don't have the experience of coming here, and that's going to be a segue into the fourth point in a sec. Basically, if you come to, well, it depends where you go, because I've said in many other videos, if you come here to Ukraine, the automatic perceived value that you will get from just being from Western Europe or North America is probably, let's say in Odessa or even in Kiev a lot, it's probably even a negative. It doesn't give you any additional added value. Now, it's going to be different if you go to Russia, or you go to a provincial town here in Ukraine that doesn't get very much tourism, or if you go to even, definitely if you go to Minsk, it's very different. You do get a perceived value, but you can't rely on it the whole time. Just think, hey, I've come here, I am waving my Western passport, I have a stronger currency, and think that, wow, all the women are going to go home with you for the price of a sandwich. I actually heard a Danish guy once say that, buffoon, that's how it works here in Ukraine. It doesn't, and I think millennials are a little bit more naive than the other nationalities about that. They think that, yeah, just being from the West is going to give them a huge boost, and the women are just going to flock them because they're desperate to get out of Ukraine. All of them, a little bit like green card chicks, as I mentioned in one of the previous, I think in the Boomer video. That's not the case, and millennials rely on that a lot. They rely on that. They're just like, I am from Rome, I am from Paris. In general, girls don't give a fuck, basically, here that much. Now, it may help. Obviously, if you're a good-looking guy and you have charisma and you have style and you have money, you have everything else, and you spend a lot of time here, then being for the West can be a bit of a bonus, but don't rely on it. That is the third biggest mistake I see millennials in particular make here. And in particular here in Ukraine, a little less so, because you do get an automatic perceived value, as I said, in the other countries a bit more still, though that might be changing as we move forward. So, fourth biggest mistake that millennials make is they waste too much time in Central Europe, and they don't get over here to Ukraine, Belarus, or Russia fast enough. They're spending all this time in countries like Poland, Czech Republic, Slovakia, Hungary, Croatia, although I think Serbia is pretty good, but I don't think they tend to go there as much. So they're going to all these other countries, never mind Western Europe, right, where they've spent, and I actually did this myself. I made this mistake when I was a millennial. So this is from personal experience. I went everywhere in Western Europe. Then I went everywhere in Northern Europe, which is also kind of Western Europe, I know, culturally. Then I went to Central Europe, and I went absolutely everywhere. Went through the Balkans, basically. I hadn't gone through all the Balkans by the time I got here finally. But you know, that first trip I took, and I do have some podcasts about that. Again, I'll link them down below and up on cards. Yeah, I mean, I think I was 30 by the time I got here, and I could have come here 5 years earlier. And yeah, it was just wasted time because I felt cheated. I was like, why didn't anyone tell me before that it was going to be so much better here? And that first trip, I was very philosophical after it. You know, a lot of crazy things happened to me, a lot of negative, but I did come back here because I saw the potential in this region for me personally. And that's the thing, you know, it's tempting if you're from, say, Western Europe in particular. Like if you're coming from the US maybe, or Latin America. I actually had a consulting client who flew from the States. He's born in Latin America, and he came straight here as his first trip to Europe. So that was a good idea. He wasn't wasting time, but he also wasn't a millennial, so he had less time to waste, I guess. But it's easy if you're from Western Europe to start with all the neighboring countries and then go where most people are going, maybe in your social group, which is probably going to be more in Central Europe, hit Prague. You know, I actually like the Czech Republic quite a lot, but yeah, better to maybe have one trip to Prague and then come out here rather than, you know, spending all your time trying to tick off every city in Central Europe. Get out here as soon as you can. Hit Belarus, hit Russia, hit Moldova, hit Central Asia, even in Kazakhstan. I have a vlog from there as well, and I'll link down below, maybe up in a card if I have space. Yeah, so that's the fourth biggest mistake I see millennials making, is like, don't waste your time in Central Europe. Get out here. I mean, if you don't like it after the first trip and you prefer it there, sure, go back. But don't wait. Don't try to do it incrementally going east. Get out here sooner rather than later. And the fifth and final mistake that millennials in particular make is they don't start learning Russian now. You should learn it now because, you know, it's a big investment of time. And in order to get good, it's going to take you probably 3 times longer than learning, say, Spanish if you're a native English speaker, or say you're a native French or German or whatever speaker, learning another language like that, that's, you know, Indo-European but Germanic or Romance language, so things like Spanish, French, Italian, etc. It's going to take about 3 times longer in my experience to learn it, so you need to start learning it now so that you get the big return, and because you're young. So if you learn it now, then you're going to get the biggest return. Like if you're learning as a boomer, I understand, like once you get there and you'll speak it, you're not going to have as much return on it. Like I started learning when I was a millennial. That's why now I get such a long road ahead of me in terms of get a return on that investment. So you need to, I mean, if you enjoy the region, obviously take a trip out here first and enjoy it and sample it. And then if it's for you, which pretty sure it's probably going to be, then invest straight away in learning Russian because it is the lingua franca still of the region. Of course, I'm standing here in Kiev, and today, I mean, since independence, Ukraine's over 30 years, more or less about 30 years ago, they became independent, and the national language is Ukrainian, but it is a cognate language. It's a little bit similar to Russian, and Russian is still widely spoken in Ukraine. In daily life, it's still the most common language in, say, Kharkiv, the second city of the country, also of Odessa Mama down south by the Black Sea. Also here, it's still the most common language in the center of Kiev. So definitely get cracking and learn it now, because you're the one, the millennials, and even Generation Z, I guess, below that, you are the ones who are going to get the longest return on that investment. So invest in it right now. So there were my 5 biggest mistakes made by millennials that I see. You know, I've been hanging out here. I was a millennial when I arrived, and of course I defined as 20 to 35 for our purposes of this video. And yeah, I wish I had known those things when I first came here. The sun is actually just about to be obscured by the trade union building here on my dad, so I'm going to wrap this up pretty quickly. If you're a millennial, or if you're not a millennial and you want to work on yourself, I think, you know, my Slavic Seduction Secrets, my premium Slavic dating course is for you. It's the best way to get cracking on that. You are going to learn how to create the optimal date, you know, obviously vet out all those scammers and find the sincere, beautiful women of Eastern Europe. It's on demand, it's below, go check it out. And to be on my free mailing list to be notified of my future courses, if you're not on it, then go and do that straight away. It's down below, there's another link, and there you get a free gift, which is the 5 biggest mistakes made by Western guys when they come here to date in Eastern Europe. And that's it, because the sun is kind of going down, and yeah, that's basically what all I gotta say for today. And I'm gonna enjoy this absolutely stunning, beautiful Slavic sunset here in Kiev, crazy Kiev, because it is Friday night. I'm going to absolutely have a blast here with two former clients that have actually moved to Ukraine. You should also think of doing the same if you're a millennial. Get your life set up to do that. See you very soon in the next video. If you have any comments, you think I missed something, millennials are also making different mistakes that I haven't mentioned, or you don't agree with the ones I pointed out in this video, then down below, write your comment there. See you very soon in the next video. Do побачення, до свидання from Kiev in free, because we don't have much of a lockdown, Ukraine.
SAR Experience.